Okay, hello. So I am going to talk about not an early childhood intervention so much as an early childhood policy effort to improve quality kind of at large scale across systems of Head Start, pre-K, and child care centers. And I'm going to talk about kind of accountability as a new tool to do that in early childhood, and specifically some work we've done over the past 3 or 4 years with Louisiana as part of a kind of partnership to help them develop a new accountability system. So to set it up, I just wanted to start by talking about the very rapid expansion of publicly funded preschool in recent years. So that top line over there is showing just overall expansion of preschool in the United States, and you can see that in the 90s there was a real big spike up in preschool participation, and that part was driven in the early years by private investments in kids going to childcare. But in more recent years, if you look at that green line, there's been a big increase in public investments in preschool, and particularly through state-funded pre-kindergarten programs. So just from 2002 to 2015, you can see that the percentage of 4-year-olds who are going to preschool doubled, and the investment, the public dollars invested into state preschool also increased very rapidly over time. So there's a lot of interest in figuring out what that's done, what has been the impact of our kind of very rapid expansion of public investments in early childhood programs. And recently I was a part of a group of researchers who tried to sort of pull together all of the studies on state pre-K programs and try to assess, okay, we've done a bunch of studies, there have been growing programs over the last 20 years or so. Has this paid off, or what has it done? And so basically, as we came together, we found that we didn't know the answer to that question, and despite quite a bit of research on the topic, we basically don't have good ways to know whether this increase in spending in early childhood has translated to impact for kids. We do know some things, fortunately, and so one of the things we know is that high-quality early interventions can have large and long-lasting effects, especially evidence from research that has allowed us to look at long-lasting effects, particularly for low-income kids, has shown promising impact. And we also sort of came to the consensus that of all the studies that have happened that we considered sort of rigorous enough to include large-scale preschool initiatives do seem to consistently show positive impacts on kids when they are starting kindergarten. But the investments are motivated not by kind of how will kids look when they come to kindergarten, but how will kids look as they progress through school and later in life. And on that, the evidence is mixed and confusing. And so part of the problem is that for really getting long-term benefits, we just need to wait longer, and we haven't been able to see for most of these state pre-K programs, the kids sort of progress through them into the adult outcomes where we've seen kind of older programs yield effect. But we are increasingly getting pretty good studies of early childhood programs, and in particular, many of you are probably aware of the Head Start impact study that showed benefits at school entry, but by 3rd grade those impacts had entirely dissipated, and evidence from a kind of oversubscription study of Tennessee's pre-K program that again showed really promising results at kindergarten entry, but not only by 3rd grade had those dissipated, but in some cases it looked like the kids that went to preschool were doing worse than the kids who hadn't. And so those have been really kind of discouraging findings. And even though there are other studies from Oklahoma and from other contexts that have suggested longer-term benefits, because those two first ones are experiments, they've gotten a lot of attention as kind of rigorous evidence around the issue of how fast effects fade out. And so as we've been sort of thinking about what to do with that evidence, a lot of attention has come to quality as kind of the potential explanation for the fade out, the idea that there are some great Head Start programs, but some not so great Head Start programs, and we're looking at the averages of those, and maybe we don't see impacts because of that. And so lots of interest in what is it about programs that makes them effective, and dosage is one thing, and that's something that Allison has been doing all this cool work trying to actually test out, and program quality is probably the thing that's getting the most attention right now, sort of broadly defined. How can we figure out what it is about these early childhood interventions that could lead them to be more sustained? And so I think whereas policy had for a long time been focused really on access, there's now much more interest in policy around how do we ensure quality, defined in a lot of different ways. And so I just put here some examples, and I'll walk through them a little bit later in the presentation, but just kind of a spike in policies for early childhood that are linked to specific requirements around improving quality. And for the longest time, the main lever we use to try to improve quality in early childhood has been around licensing, and so basically creating floors for what the quality needs to be in particular setting. And so you can see that early childhood is very fragmented. We have kids who are being taken care of by a neighbor or by a caregiver in a home, so family child care homes, child care centers, Head Start programs, state pre-kindergarten programs, and they all have very different licensing requirements, and they end up with very different kinds of quality because of that. So just one example would be requirements around teacher education, and family child care homes typically have very little to no requirements at all versus state pre-kindergarten that often require the same thing as K-12 teachers. And in turn, you see really different education levels across those different sectors. And in general, I think these licensing requirements have been very powerful levers for improving quality. One of the things I studied while I was here at Stanford was the effects of Head Start's efforts to raise teacher education levels by requiring that at least half the teachers have an associate's degree, and later raising that to saying what are the effects of having it, requiring that half the teachers have bachelor's degrees. And you can see that today in Head Start, today, this was 2014, today 100% of the teachers have associate's degree, and more than 3/4 have bachelor's degrees, up from just 34% of teachers having any degrees in Head Start in the late 90s. So there's kind of been a huge increase, in part due to these licensing requirements. But more recently, we've kind of been trying a new approach to improve quality, sort of taking a lesson from accountability efforts in K-12 and trying to create accountability systems in early childhood where we kind of measure the quality in early childhood programs and try to create financial incentives for programs to meet higher levels of quality, and also to give parents the information about quality so that they hopefully make decisions about their kids' choices based on quality. So between 97 and 2015, there was a really rapid increase in the number of states that have these kinds of programs. So you can see that in 97 there was one, and then in around 2011, when Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant funds came about, they required states, in order to get funding, to have some sort of tiered quality rating system where programs could get more money based on their quality if they made that publicly available through a rating system like that. So it's been very rapidly expanded. And the basic idea of these systems is we're going to assess these programs on the quality that they have, and we're going to create both incentives and supports for programs to improve. And the idea is that both providers and parents will get that information and react in ways that accountability systems rely on, so that providers will have incentives to improve and parents will sort of vote with their feet and go to the programs that are rated better, and that over time, lower quality programs will sort of either improve or leave the market, and kids will be in better programs. So far, there's been very limited actual evidence on the effects of the accountability systems, and I think what we want to know is, has this expansion, this introduction of quality rating systems in pretty much all states led to improvements for kids, like our programs getting better, and in turn, our kids doing better? There hasn't been a ton of research on it yet, and that first black one, where it says, do providers with different ratings actually differ in quality, has been the main thing that people have been focusing on. So just the measurement, like, do we know how to go into preschool programs and evaluate which ones are better than others, and can we do that systematically in a fair way to even like measure quality accurately? So there's been a lot of kind of measurement work on that, but very little on the side of kind of do the kind of underlying mechanisms that would have to work for this to lead to changes in child outcomes happen? So do the providers respond, or do parents change what they're going to do? And that's been kind of what I've wanted to find ways to answer. And so I've been working on this in a couple of contexts. One is in North Carolina, and North Carolina is a really interesting context because it was one of the very earliest programs to do this. So there's a lot of data. It's a not voluntary program, so all programs in the state participate, which is not the case in all states. And they also have this really nice feature in their data where because of the way they do classroom observations, it creates a little bit of an exogenous source of variation in what kind of star ratings programs get and publicize. And so we've been doing work trying to get at the actual effect of star ratings on subsequent program quality, like does getting a particular rating lead you to improve, and also on enrollment in programs as a proxy for whether parents are kind of responding to those the star ratings by choosing different places. And I'm not going to really talk that much about any of the findings from that because Scott is going to talk about that work, which is joint with Tom D. Later today in the program session. But I will summarize to say that we get kind of encouraging evidence that suggests that both the programs and the parents are responding to the star ratings by changing their behavior. So some of the first evidence that the mechanisms seem to work. What I'm going to talk about for the rest of the time I have is the context of Louisiana, a really different context because they are very early in the development of their quality rating system, but they've been very kind of thoughtful about trying to sort of create a really unique quality rating system and allow researchers to do work with them through the development process to kind of iteratively figure out how to really lead to quality improvements across sectors. So why I found the Louisiana context very unique comes to three basic features of their program. The first is that the Department of Ed in Louisiana got control of not only the pre-K program in the public schools, but they got control of child care licensing in the state, which is very unusual, as well as the authorizing of Head Start programs. So you have a single department controlling all the quality rating system, and they've made a non-voluntary, meaningful rating system for every single program in the serving 0 to 5-year-olds through public resources. The other really unique thing about their quality rating systems is usually states measure a lot of different things in a quality rating system, many of them structural, like teacher education levels, ratios, whether your classrooms have a particular setup, like a variety of structural things. Louisiana has none of those things in their evaluation, and the only way they assess programs is by observing the quality of teacher-child interactions in classrooms. So they go into every single publicly funded classroom 2 to 3 times per year to observe the way teachers and kids are interacting and try to measure that accurately. And then the third piece, which is most related to what I'll talk about today, is they've really taken seriously the idea of parent information in a way that I don't think any other state has. So every parish in Louisiana, which is basically like a district, needs to come up with a plan so that if a parent signs up for any publicly funded program, they need to know about all publicly funded programs in their community, and they need to see the quality ratings of all those programs before they can be given a slot. The idea being that most parents don't know what their options are and certainly don't know what the quality are is, so this would be like a way to allow parents to figure those things out. And so we formed this partnership. One big piece of the partnership was around, can we really do this? Like, can we accurately measure at scale quality in classrooms for infants to 5-year-olds every year in a way that's reliable and fair? And the other was, can we really change parent behaviors by giving them information? And that's the piece that I'll just talk about for the rest of the talk. So the idea is that QRIS kind of assume that a main problem in getting kids to high quality programs is that parents are poor judges of quality. So if we give parents accurate quality, then they will make different decisions, and then ultimately their kids will do better in school. And we don't really have great evidence on to what extent that's true, and also to what extent that's the problem with why kids get into low quality schools. So the idea is, maybe parents don't even know about the importance of quality, so it's kind of about they're not caring about the things that we're trying to incentivize. Maybe they do know about the importance of quality, but they struggle to differentiate and to figure out which are the high quality programs. If that's the case, then telling them that information seems useful. But then the third one, which is probably a really salient piece too, is maybe they do know it's important and would know how to find it, but like those programs don't exist or don't exist in an affordable way that parents can actually utilize. So in our work, the first stage was to try to understand how low-income families in Louisiana were finding care and what barriers they were hitting up against. And so we collected a whole bunch of data. Most central here is that we surveyed 1,800 parents of kids attending publicly funded preschool programs in Louisiana, and they were 4-year-olds. So we didn't focus on the very youngest children. So these were the kids in the preschool age. And we collected a whole bunch of other data, like our own class observations of the quality and surveys of the teachers and the principals and direct assessments of the kids and a ton of other data. But from the survey, I'm going to show you a few key findings about how Louisiana parents are thinking about care. So this first set of pictures is showing you how important parents say a variety of things were to them when they were selecting programs. So how important was it to you that your program be good at raising academic skills is the first one here, and you can see that was the most popular of the things that parents said was really important, and so was cleanliness and safety, and so was a warm teacher. And so nearly everybody said those things were extremely important to them. But there's also a bunch of these other features of care that parents mentioned were important to them. There are much more kind of around convenience and what's feasible. So affordability, subsidy eligibility, transportation, care for siblings. And you can see there's kind of a big gradient here where the darker ones are the parents who had no high school degrees, and they are citing these kind of constraints as much more important than the very lightest ones here, which are parents that have a 4-year degree. So for the lowest income, the lowest educated parents, those constraints were very pronounced. In general, searches were very, very limited with extremely little comparison shopping. So this bar is just the overall likelihood that you visited, that you did not visit any other center other than the one that you picked. So 2/3 of parents didn't visit a center, and 40% of the parents said they didn't even consider another program other than the one they received. And you can see that again, it's kind of on this great gradient based on parental education. Despite this kind of very short search, and maybe not surprisingly, most parents said they were very satisfied and would choose their program again. So more than 2/3 of them said they were very satisfied, and nearly all of them said they were at least satisfied with their program. So very little variation. And so then we wanted to see, like, is there satisfaction related to anything we can observe? Because we collected so much information about the quality of the classroom, the learning gains of the kids in the classroom from direct assessments, and through director survey, things about do you let the parents get involved? Do you charge fees? And importantly, what are the kind of convenience factors of the program? Like, are there longer hours, summer care, transportation? Because one thing we figured is that maybe it's the case that parents are really satisfied because the program is working for them and their lives. Not so much on the quality end, but because it's working for them as far as getting to work and having enough coverage or dropping their 2 kids off at the same place. And so we had a ton of data to look at, and in general, we found literally no relationships between parents' overall satisfaction levels and any of the measures we had of their overall satisfaction. And then we tried to say, okay, well, maybe overall satisfaction is a hard measure, but what if we asked them specifically, like, how good is your program at raising kids' ability to know letters or to read, or how much do you feel like it's affordable and convenient, and could we match the specific measures we had to their assessment of specific characteristics of the program? And so here's like a kind of summary of measures we had, like the class score for the teacher's experience levels, teacher education, et cetera, all the way down to do you provide sick care, do you provide long hours? And the shaded ones are the areas where we kind of anticipated to have potentially a relationship. So we might think that teachers that have higher levels of education or experience might create a more warm classroom where parents perceive their kids are learning more. And then here's what we ultimately found in our results, which again suggested like extremely low alignment between anything observed about the centers and what parents actually said. The only ones where we actually got a match between what we said is the programs that served more kids, like larger teacher-student ratios, the parents said were more affordable, and also it was the case that when parents had to pay for care, they found it less affordable than when they did not have to pay. But in general, there was like very limited alignment. And finally, the last one I'll show you is just around the challenge of finding care and how it differed across the sectors. And so we found that there were, in the overall patterns I showed you, really big differences depending on the kind of programs that kids were in. So if you talked to the Head Start or pre-K parents, they were much less likely to consider other programs, to visit other programs than the people who ended up in childcare. And then the childcare families reported they found the process substantially more difficult than either of the other groups, and they were substantially less likely to have said that the program was their top choice. So nearly everyone in our childcare sample, when we asked them, did you also consider a pre-K program, said yes. Many of them also considered a Head Start program, suggesting they would have very much liked to enter a program if such a thing existed for them. So to wrap up from this our initial look into the survey data, what we're ultimately interested in is, can QRIS lead to changes in parental choice in ECE? I will say that from our North Carolina data, we do see that the ratings impact enrollment in programs, suggesting that maybe yes. For low-income parents in Louisiana, it does seem that they value the information, they want a high-quality program, and they really struggle to assess the quality, and that it's particularly pronounced for the lowest income, lowest educated families and the ones that end up in childcare as well. So we think that information interventions hold promise, but supply is also very constrained, and we don't know to what extent we can expect an information intervention, while useful, to actually change parental choice. But the coordinated enrollment efforts in Louisiana give us like a really nice way to look into it, because every parish now is having to develop a bit of a system for how to do this and how to give parents information. And so now we've been trying to find ways to kind of embed research in that. And so one of the examples is work I'm doing with John Valant and others in New Orleans, who's embedded a bunch of this the application process into the One App, and there we're trying to look at to what extent through kind of informational systems we can change parents' enrollment patterns in general, and hopefully also nudge them into higher quality programs. Thank you.